We're live. We are live on YouTube. Hello, everyone. This is the Violet Reality bringing you another episode of TVR Live from our brand new space. Very well lit.
We're very brightly lit for 2 a.m. in the morning here. And
it is 2 a.m. It is 2 a.m. in England, but it is not 2 a.m. where our special guest today is Damien Shields. You're in Australia. What time is it there?
It's just before lunchtime, so it's 11:30 in the morning, and I think this is it's weird. It's 2 o'clock in the morning for you guys. It's 11 for me. Yet I'm the one that looks disheveled, and I can't barely keep my eyes open, and you guys look great. So perfect.
It's all good. It's all good. So today, let's talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about what's been happening with the Michael Jackson case with Sony Records, and I'm going to give our viewers a little bit of context first, because obviously a lot of our viewers may not know the history. So let's go all the way back to 2010 when the Michael album came out, and even before it came out, and before we heard any songs, we started hearing the Jackson family and some people that something wasn't quite right, and there were some stories that there were some fake songs on there. And then, of course, breaking news started streaming on MichaelJackson.com, and as soon as that vocal came in, I myself and every other MJ fan that I knew was just immediately like, that's not him.
Oh, yeah.
It's so obviously not him. This is somebody that we have listened to for decades of our lives, you know, collectively hundreds and thousands of years between the fan base, and we know his voice, and we know when it is his voice, and we know when it's not his voice. And so the immediate reaction was just like, what is actually happening? Is it a joke that they're playing? Like, what on earth is this? And then from there, it just got worse and worse and worse. There was 2 more fake songs on the record. Sony stuck to their guns, saying that these songs, the Cascio family on Oprah, just to once again say, oh yeah, they're definitely real, without providing any evidence. No evidence at all has been provided of anything, you know, that would remote. And then it's sort of obviously we as fans remained upset about it. You particularly did a lot of work over the last 8 years collecting it together to make a project. And then in the last few years, Vera brought her class action lawsuit against Sony to try and and get this all out in the open. Which is basically where we're at today. And now the media has thankfully all picked up on what we've been trying to tell them for the last 8 years.
That time.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you on what's happening with the latest that's come out in the court case, and can you explain what exactly Sony have said and they haven't said? Because people are saying that they have admitted to the songs being faked. Other people say, well, there's a bit more nuance than that, because it's dependent on this argument that they're trying to make about whether it's commercial speech or non-commercial speech, and necessarily them admitting it, but it's just a legal kind of loophole. So let's try and clarify this a little bit for people.
Okay, so basically, when Vera brought her suit in 2014, the remedies she brought were fraud against Eddie Cascio and James Porte and their production company, Angelicsson Productions. So she brings a fraud suit against them for having created the songs, for having committed the fraud. And then she brings a separate set of charges or allegations against Sony and the estate for having been the distributors of the material. So they aren't sued for fraud specifically. So they're facing a separate set of hurdles in court, which is why we're not hearing about Cascio and Porte right now. They're not facing the same series of hearings that Sony and the estate are going through right now. So what Sony are doing is, Sony are trying to say that when they spoke about the album by putting wording on the album art and in commercials that appeared on television and the internet, they weren't engaging in commercial speech. They were saying that they were contributing to a public debate about the authenticity of the songs. So that's just, this is their contribution to the public debate. It's not a statement of fact. It's not an assurance to their consumers, and it's not commercial speech, it's a ridiculous argument. So they went to court in 2016 to try and have themselves removed from the case. They said, we shouldn't be sued here because you're suing us for the commercial speech, but it's not commercial speech, and we don't deserve to be a part of this. We haven't done anything against the law. So they went to court in 2016 and they argued each of their own sides. And basically, at that point of the case, when they're saying, hey, we want to be removed, Vera is technically allowed to present proof to say, we shouldn't be removed because I can prove that it's fake. And at that point, they made the decision of their own free will to concede, okay, let's say we're not going to contest it. It's not Michael. For the purposes of this argument, we do not want you to show us evidence that it's not Michael. We are willing to concede that it's not. But having said that it's not Michael, we still shouldn't be sued because we didn't engage in commercial speech. And even if it's not Michael, we haven't done anything wrong by the law because we have the benefit of the First Amendment, which affords us the ability to have creative free speech, which means because this is an artistic project, we can talk about it freely because it's an artistic expression. And even if the vocals are not Michael's, they're in the style of Michael Jackson. They're created with the purpose of appearing as a Michael Jackson song. And the lyrics are crafted in the style of Michael Jackson's song, what you might expect from Michael Jackson. So therefore, we can say that it is without lying to you. Or even if we are lying to you, we can't be remedied. So they argued that in 2016. Remember, this is not new. Like, they argued this 2 years ago. And then a month later, the judge in the case, who was very, very unhappy with their arguments, she basically said, well, it sounds to me like under your admitted facts and what you're willing to say in court, you ripped off the consumers. You ripped them off. And they turned around and said, well, at the time we got the songs, we didn't know if they were Michael or not. We didn't know that they were fake. And if anyone's to blame, it's James Porte and Eddie Cascio, the guys who produced the songs in their basement. And so the judge then turned around to that and said, hang on a second, it just sounds like you're throwing them under the bus and saying, hey, they created fake songs in their basement, but then they failed to tell us that they were fake. So it's not our fault. We released them without knowing. So that was 2016. The judge ruled against them and said, no, you've engaged in commercial speech and you have to face the music, pun intended. And they appealed it. And now here we are seeing them argue again that they haven't engaged in commercial speech and that they have conceded again for the purposes of the particular stage of the legal proceedings that it's not Michael Jackson. But having said that, even so, we're allowed to say that it is. Now, they did not have to concede that. So that was a choice. So that's why people are jumping on the bandwagon of they've conceded that the songs are fake, because for all intents and purposes, and as the judge pointed out, under their willingly admitted facts, they have said that it's not Michael Jackson. And there's one really interesting quote that the media is not publishing at the moment, which is in relation to a concession that they made outside their, let's say it's not Michael Jackson, argument. And for the purposes of the argument, just in court conversation, they actually said, well, we are willing to submit that in the time since we've released it, it may have come out that the vocalist is not Michael Jackson. And that statement is not directly in line with their hey, all right, we'll admit that it's not him, but we're allowed to release the songs. That was just courtroom conversation on court record, on transcripted court record. So anybody who's saying that they aren't conceding that there's a chance that Michael didn't sing these songs is falsely reporting it. But also anyone who is saying that they've come clean and confessed. They haven't confessed or admitted outright that Michael didn't sing the songs, but they've made the concession.
Yeah.
And that in itself is news, because a company who...
So that's huge, and that's really the focus point of what the news should be right now. But as you said, it is being slightly misreported or not reported correctly by some of the media.
And that's only because the media is 4 years behind. The media has not followed this. So the context in which they're seeing a tweet from me saying Sony's conceded that the songs aren't Michael again, they don't understand the context in which that has happened. So, I mean, it's the media not doing their jobs properly. Thankfully today, the journalists who have actually taken, 24 to 48 hours to look into this and have asked questions and found the facts are reporting it by saying Sony have conceded or admitted that Michael may have not recorded them, which is probably more accurate. But as far as their legal argument, they did concede for the purpose of that argument. He's not the singer. So it's just complicated, and it's not clear cut as far as the way that it's working in court. If this goes to trial, though, there's going to be no interpretations wrong. What they say is what they say, and that is it. But yeah, this is for the purpose of argument, so it's tricky, but it's big news.
So it's quite nuanced, but the big news is basically that concessions have been made for the not necessarily the first time, but for with the context and more a time where leads scale, I think is the main thing, and that the general public who don't know that this is the case. I mean, we've known this is the case since 2000. Since 2010, since the case, and been fighting this that whole time. But for a lot of people, this is something brand new. They never even heard anything about this at the time. Now it's getting reported, and they're like, when it happened. Yeah. So where do you think we go from here? And the other thing that I think is worth talking about is that we are all those of time, and those of us especially who work with audio on a daily basis, and whether that's doing podcasts or doing interviews or being a musician or knowing audio recording, we're all basically 100% sure at this point that the vocalist on these tracks is Jason Malachi. It's always been fairly obvious in the comparisons to us. It's very identical voice, between his own recordings and these songs, down at the vibrato and down at all the details of his tone. So where does he come into it at this point? When the Cascios and James face the music on their end in this fraud case, where does he come into it, and how do you think that might play out?
Well, he'll come into it as a defendant at some point. When Vera filed the lawsuit in 2014, we all had evidence that it was Jason, but probably not enough to add Jason as a defendant or a participant in the case. The 4 years that have passed since the lawsuit was filed, obviously I haven't stopped investigating it, and other people haven't as well. So there have been significant developments. Jason has indicated that, yeah, he did do it, and he's actually indicated interest in trying to help this case resolve, but it hasn't worked out yet. So he's basically working in the shadows, being very coy about it, but also not doing anything about it at the moment. So if he doesn't choose of his own free will to come forward and settle this and say, look, I recorded those vocals, and these are the circumstances in which I did it, but I did it. if he doesn't do that, then he's just going to be a defendant at some point. The writing is on the wall for Jason, unfortunately. And you'll know just as well as any Michael Jackson fan who's been around for years, Jason was one of us. Back in the day, before Michael died, we were on the fan forums together. He was just a fan just like us. And now he's embroiled in this situation on the wrong side of the fence as someone who undoubtedly does love Michael Jackson. So it's sad to see that he's gone to the other side. He's on the dark side now, I guess. But I feel like the only way to free himself of the shadow is to speak the truth and let the truth set him free. Because it's not really. I mean, it is a matter of debate for the public because they don't have the evidence. And I might look cocky sitting here saying, "Oh, there's evidence and blah blah." Well, it hasn't been presented publicly, but it is there, and it will end up with Jason in a courtroom if he doesn't just tell the truth. So, and I'm not saying that to intimidate him or attack him or anything. It's just the truth. So that will be the next step, is him finding himself involved. And yeah, I mean, this whole thing with Sony and the estate, and if it was commercial speech, has to be resolved before anything can go further. And then the next step after this will be class certification, because remember, Vera has filed this lawsuit as a class action on behalf of everyone who was damaged. So everyone who Sony and the estate defrauded by releasing fake songs and selling them to people. She's done it on behalf of all of those people in the state in which she lives and purchased the album. But in order for it to be officially recognized by the courts as a class action, the court has to certify it as a class action. And it hasn't got there yet, which is unbelievable, really, considering this case was filed 4 years ago. If this wasn't Sony Music, who didn't have, multiple billions of dollars and unlimited legal resources to drag this thing on and appeal and just argue and request extension after extension, which they have been doing. If it wasn't Sony, this thing could have been resolved already. But 4 years later, here we are, and we still aren't certified as a class. So, and there has been no discovery either. Sony has not entered into a discovery, and neither has Vera, which is the stage where they each get to ask each other, okay, this is what we need from you so we can prove our point. And that hasn't even happened yet. So, yeah, it's a long, drawn-out process. Once this gets put in the past, we can move a little faster, but still it's going to be, the same mechanics of any lawsuit where you have to wait for the next hearing and the next hearing, and it's still going to take time. So I don't expect the legal proceedings to move quickly unless, for example, Jason decides he's going to come clean and then it's over. Because, I mean, Sony can't continue to defend this once they've got the guy who sang it saying, I sang it. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And neither can Eddie Cascio and James Porte. So
are they the only people that could make a point by coming out and admitting what the truth is, or is there a possibility that that other people can really tilt there? Because I have to say, as a huge fan, and I've been a fan of him for my whole life, I was massively disappointed with Teddy Reilly being involved with the songs, and at one point, initially him defending their authenticity. Is it possible that Teddy could come out and say, yes, I was paid to do it and I needed the money, or I needed the work, and it wasn't him this whole time?
Well, I think being that Teddy comes in after the fact, he's introduced to the songs at the production level once the estate had and Sony had obtained them from Eddie Cascio and James Porte. It's just an opinion, and I'm not sure. Like, don't get me wrong, Teddy Reilly's testimony, the stuff he's already said, and what he could potentially still say, is compelling. And from a storytelling perspective, and talking about what actually happened, I would love for Teddy Reilly to talk more about this. Whether he's a credible witness in court, I don't know. I don't believe he would be, because he's changed his story so many times. You know, I've got evidence that during the production of the songs, before we heard them, before the public has heard them, while he's sitting in a studio working on them, he's saying, I don't want to put my name on this. I don't want those vocals to be associated with me. I'm producing the music, but those vocals are not Michael. And then fast forward to Oprah Winfrey, and then he's sitting there on national television saying, this is Michael's voice. You can hear the authenticity, blah, blah, blah. Then some TMZ interviews catching him in the street saying that it is Michael's voice. Then some tweets to fans and people on the internet, and engaging in private conversations via social media with myself and people from the MJ cast and all kinds of people saying I was tricked, I was set up, you know, the songs are fake, this is not my fault, this is Eddie Cascio and James Porte's fault, the truth will come out, I can't talk about it right now, but the truth will come out. So when you have him jumping ship back and forth so many times, it begs the question whether he's credible in court, but it's certainly interesting. And it certainly goes to show that, you know, if someone like Teddy Riley's name is listed in that statement by the estate that says these audio engineers said that it was definitely Michael Jackson, well,
that's not what happened. That's the crazy thing. Like, they come out with a statement with names on it saying these people said that it was Michael, and then those people themselves saying no, like Cory Rooney straight away. He's like, no, I was there, and that's not what happened.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've interviewed Cory, and he's amazing, and he told it to me straight, exactly what happened. And those interviews, you'll be hearing them. You'll be hearing them in the podcast that I'm putting together. I'm going to document all of this stuff as a documentary podcast series, which at the time I started investigating this was not the purpose. But the way the landscape has shifted with the way people consume these kind of cases. Yeah. I intended to write a book in the beginning, and I intended to write a book for a very long time, and I do still intend to write a book, but the focus has shifted to presenting this case and the evidence that I've discovered as a podcast, because it's just more easily consumed, and it makes for great listening. Like when you hear these guys speaking, the conviction in their voice, they were there in the room, they know what happened, they're talking about it, they're willing to be cross-examined, have questions asked of them, and they can answer the questions. And you know what? I've spoken to not just Cory Rooney, but several people who were in that listening session, and they all say exactly the same thing. And none of those people had spoken to each other about it since the session. So, but somehow they tell the exact same story, and the story that they all tell is not the story of that statement. Cory Rooney's exact words immediately after the statement was posted online 8 years ago was, I've just read the statement and that's just some bullshit from the Michael Jackson estate. I was there and that's not what happened. Tarrell Jackson said the exact same thing. Michael Jackson's nephew, Tarrell from 3T, Tito Jackson's son, said, I was there and I want to confirm that this statement actually comes from Howard Weitzman of the estate, because it's not true. And he didn't believe that the statement was even legitimate, because he knew that everything that was said in the statement was not the way it played out. So, and the names on the statement aren't the only parts of the statement which are untrue at worst, disingenuous at best, shady. There are other parts of that statement that are not quite the way things happened as well. So that's all going to come out as well, obviously. But yeah, it's a shit show. They had every single person who mattered telling them what to do, basically advising them, pleading with them. They had the beneficiaries of the estate that they represent saying, please don't release these songs. The beneficiaries. This is how I like to put it into context a little bit, into perspective for people to understand what happened here. Sony gets the songs from Eddie Cascio and James Porte. They give the songs to Teddy Reilly to do remixes of. Teddy Reilly has issues with the vocals. Teddy Reilly brings some of Michael's families in to hear it, and they agree it's not Michael. It gets eventually to Catherine, who is the prime beneficiary of Michael's estate. That's Michael Jackson's mother. And she says, that's not Michael. And then she gets involved and she starts pleading with the estate, please don't release it. Then the estate say, well, no, it is Michael Jackson and we're releasing it. So the Jackson family say, right, you guys need to have a listening session with Michael's actual engineers. Bring them into a room and they'll tell you. They will tell you this is not Michael. So they did that. They brought the engineers in. For the most part, with a couple of exceptions, they did. You've got an exception is Stuart Brawley, who is an engineer from the Invincible album, Michael's last studio album from 2001, who said that it was Michael. But Stuart Brawley is the guy who mixed these songs for James Porte and Eddie Cascio. So what else do you expect him to say? But a lot of the other guys who came into that studio over the course flat out said, look, we're not willing to say this is Michael. There's too many things on these recordings that don't make sense, from the inconsistencies of, the headphone bleed being missing and finger snaps and foot stomps and trademark things that would be on a Michael Jackson recording which weren't there. And then the tone and the vibrato and all of the different things, the phrasing, the pronunciation of words, things that are spoken about, words that this guy sings. The singer of these songs is singing words in a dialect that Michael Jackson did not sing or speak in.
Yeah, exactly.
So then you get into a linguistic point of view. You could have a linguistics analysis done to say that, and Vera has done that with her lawsuit. She had a forensic audiologist do the analysis, 41-page report that concludes that it's not Michael, rejects the hypothesis that it's Michael Jackson singing. And that's part of that report, is a bit of linguistics analysis to say that this guy doesn't even speak in the same dialect as Michael Jackson.
Yep.
Like, not only is the vibrato wrong, which is confirmed in the report, and a whole bunch of other things, but he doesn't speak the same dialect, which is just astonishing. Now, the estate and Sony claim they had a forensic musicologist come in and do their analysis and give them a report, which apparently happened overnight. Whereas Vera's forensic audiologist, I think, took 2 months to do his analysis because it was groundbreaking. Now, one thing that people publicly don't understand is this is a precedent-setting case as far as vocal imitation being represented or attributed to an artist. So there is no previous standard in forensic audiology that could be referred to, and a methodology developed to apply to this case in order to determine, is it Michael or isn't it Michael? So if Sony is saying they had a forensic musicologist confirm it in a day, it's impossible. Because what Vera's forensic musicologist had to do was sit down and figure out, right, what are the key indicators here of that I can draw from a singing voice to forensically identify that these vocals are either Michael's or not Michael's. So he had to design a methodology himself, come up with it. It's the first time this has ever happened. Not only did he spend the months creating the methodology, applying it to the Cascio tracks, applying it to real Michael Jackson songs, and coming up with a conclusion which resulted in him rejecting the fact that it was Michael and saying that he didn't think it was. But he also said the singer is likely to be Jason. His report goes as far as analysing the linguistics from the Cascio tracks against Michael's dialect and Jason's, which isn't being reported. So he's gone the extra step and just applied, based on the statements of Tony Curtis, who was Jason's producer, who said, I worked with Jason for 10 years, I know that's him. Without a shadow of a doubt, that is Jason Malachi. And a few other pieces of evidence that he included, which he used as justification for bringing Jason into it from an analytical point of view. And he could very well have said, look, I've analysed it and there's no chance that it's Jason. It's not Michael, but also it's not Jason, which he did say. He said he would lean towards that it was more likely to be Jason, but he hadn't done a full enough analysis on Jason to give a conclusion on it, or to give like a fully fledged opinion. But you know, that's with the forensics. So all of these things in this statement that we're talking about, you know, the listening session and the forensic musicology, and it doesn't add up. It's fake news.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, Damien. I think we're gonna sort of wrap that up there. I think we've covered sort of the main points of where we're at with the case, and a little bit of history, and a little bit of what we might see moving forward. I know you've had a very busy day with all the media calling you and whatnot. But one thing we'd find out, mentioned, you are presenting everything that you've done with all of your research in these past 8 years in your podcast. When can we expect to hear it, and sort of how does the media focus being on this case right now help you to sort of bring that attention to the research that you've done?
Well, the media attention is great. We've been crying out for this, like you said earlier, for 8 years. We just want someone to actually take notice of this. And it's great that it's happening, and hopefully now that the pressure is on, we can keep the pressure on. Hopefully the media doesn't drop it. Yes, I will be presenting the findings of my investigation as a podcast series. You'll be hearing from the people that I've just claimed told me certain things. You'll hear from them. Like, you'll hear their voice telling the story exactly as they experienced it. And it's a compelling story. It's fascinating. I wasn't expecting this news to be so big so soon. Being that they've owned the estate and Sony have gone to they've given their oral arguments about why they think they should be dismissed. But we have to remember that the judge or the court hasn't ruled yet. So the judge hasn't decided whether Sony stays on this case or not. I was kind of hoping that I would have a little bit of time up my sleeve to get the very, very basics of the podcast online. So to get a trailer up at least, and somewhere for people to go to subscribe, because it's not ready. It's not ready to be released, and it's still a little while off. I'm still piecing it together, and it's a long process to go into full documentary production on a podcast series when you've got 8 years of research. I've got hundreds of hours of interviews. I've got, you know, it's essentially I have to write a book, but then I also have to take all the audio and piece it together and present it to you. So it's a lot of work. The first step will be to get the trailer online and to get like an introductory piece online where anybody who's never heard of this, they can listen to the introductory piece and they can get a basic understanding of what the case is, what happened, and what I intend to outline with the case. And then for people who are familiar with it, like you guys, just light the flame again. Get people talking about it again. It's been 8 years. A lot of people have moved on, but when people hear the introductory piece and they remember how everyone was feeling and that they were feeling that way as well, you know, the emotions will come back and it will put you back in that moment, and hopefully it will kind of motivate people to go, yes, this does need to be resolved. And yes, we do want to hear the evidence, and not just me and not just you and not just the Michael Jackson fan community, but the broader public. Because as far as true crime stories go, this is a massive one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's Michael Jackson's name attached to it. It's huge.
Absolutely.
And in my opinion, and I've said this to a couple of the media outlets that contacted me, in my opinion, this is perhaps the biggest artistic fraud in the history of popular music. You know, Milli Vanilli kind of has the title at the moment, but this trumps that times a million. This is so much more serious than Milli Vanilli. And I think the media, I think the public, and I think history needs to view this with the seriousness of what it actually is. And if a podcast series can bring a little bit of exposure to that and outline the evidence and give people a place that they can go to study it and understand it and see what really happened, great. If a book can do that, great. If Vera's lawsuit can do that, which we hope it does, and that's the #1 priority and that's the most important thing, great. But we've got to do something. So that's where the podcast comes from. And, you know, I can't just sit on my hands and do nothing. I have to do something, and this is what I've decided that I can contribute to help bring transparency, bring closure, and bring the truth, because the truth is the most important thing. And it's taken 8 years, but like Michael says, lies run sprints, but the truth runs marathons.
Yep,
so
exactly.
we just got to keep running.
That's it. That's it. Thanks for joining us, Damien.
Thanks so
it's been
much.
absolutely to get your opinion and on the latest developments and everything that's been happening and what you're planning to do moving forward with the podcast. We are absolutely looking forward to it, and we'll definitely get you back on the show to follow things up when more developments happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been an honor and a privilege. I love you guys. I love your work, and you're doing great stuff. So keep it up. Please keep it up.
Cool. Awesome, man.
Thank
Catch
you
you later.
so
Get some rest.
Yes.
See ya.
See you later, man.
See ya. See ya, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.